is The Guardian.
Delegates, over 125 years of federation, this is only the 15th time we have gathered with federal Labor in majority government. That tells you something about the history that we made together last year.
I'm Tom McIlroy, political editor at Guardian Australia. We're at Labor's National Conference, where the party leaders, rank and file members and trade unions have started preparations for the 2028 federal election and updated Labor's national platform. Today we're recording on Kaurna country in Adelaide, and I've roped in Guardian Australia's chief political correspondent Dan Jervis-Bardy as my co-host. Our guest is the South Australian Premier Peter Malinauskas. Having recently fought off One Nation in his own state election, the Premier talks about the approach he believes federal Labor should take, including warning against patronising potential supporters of Pauline Hanson or dismissing the frustration many people feel about the state of the economy and today's politics. Malinauskas makes the case for Aukus, even with the uncertainty surrounding the nuclear submarine project. We also discuss promoting AI investment in the state, as well as the Premier's concerns about the huge changes coming for the way we work. This is the Australian Politics Podcast. Well, Premier Peter Malinauskas, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Really appreciate you taking the time after a busy week. We're recording on Friday afternoon at the bit past the midway point of the Labor conference. You said in the speech at the beginning of the conference, alluding to One Nation,
if you can't govern your dog, you can't govern the country.
Are you worried that voters might be making a different assessment of Pauline Hanson?
Well, naturally, let's be frank about it. We've seen an extraordinary surge in the polling support for One Nation. I witnessed in our state election in March this year, One Nation basically going from zero presence in South Australia in the space of 2 months after post-Bondi to seeing them outpoll the Liberal Party of South Australia, which is, pretty extraordinary. People of my age are only accustomed to two major political parties in Australia and them finishing first or second and there being distant thirds. Well, I witnessed in an election that I participated in quite closely, the Liberal Party finishing third. That's a pretty seismic event in an important state election. So yes, naturally I'm concerned about it. My remarks at the beginning of the conference were a bit of just a quip in the context of Barnaby's contribution on the 7:30 report on Monday night, but I was using a bit of levity to then draw on a serious point that I think we need to think about carefully.
Do you think that policy solutions are the way to demonstrate the weaknesses of One Nation's offerings to the country?
In part, yes. Well, not in part, principally, yes. But that won't be the only thing. I think, politics is always a contest of ideas and demonstrating the points of difference. And I think there are very substantial points of difference. And when elections come around, people will be interested in that contrast. And we've got a responsibility to make sure that the electorate is well informed. And I think we should be unapologetic about that. What I would say, though, when people hear politicians talking about points of difference, though, they normally think about it in the context of people arguing with one another. I think what is really important as we contemplate when the Labor Party and people of my, side of politics think about how we go about making that argument, I think we'd be very carefully about the way we go about doing it, right? And the tone and that we talk about, not in the way we sound, but, providing a understanding that there are people out there who have a point of view that might lend themselves to support One Nation and not immediately castigating them for it or demeaning them for it or describing them with words such as racist. I think that would be a big mistake, largely because it's more often than not true. So points of difference on policy, yes. Points of difference programmatically, but also what we believe in and values, absolutely. But go about drawing out those points of difference in a civil way.
I mean, that's clearly the approach that you took during the South Australian state election and that have done since then. Do you think your colleagues in the Labor Party, including at a federal level, have got that messaging right? Do you think it is a risk for the Labor Party to not get that messaging right?
I think so. In terms of the federal parliamentary Labor Party, yes. I think they're thinking about this challenge carefully. I think we have to avoid, at all costs, though, seeking to work up our supporters, Labor Party sub-branch members, or long-time Labor voters, or people of the progressive political ilk. I think we'd be very careful about whipping them up into a frenzy, that an anti-One Nation frenzy, which would be really easy to do, in the same way that I see supporters of One Nation being whipped up into a state of anger. Because I've never persuaded anyone of anything really by getting angry, right? And I've learned that the hard way. I've tried, it doesn't work. And nor have I ever persuaded anyone of a different point of view by speaking down to them. And I see this in politics, and I think we are guilty on the progressive side of politics that, if you become so morally, if you become so confident in your opinion and so in such a way that you prosecute your argument in a way that comes across as morally superior, I think people are going to say, yeah, righto, mate, whatever, and tell you to nick off, and sometimes with some justification. So I think we're going to avoid any sort of sense of moral superiority and just draw it down, and understanding why people would have a point of view that we don't agree with.
When talking about One Nation and talking about policies more generally, you've been very upfront in saying just about the key policy challenge for your state and the nation is housing, that's at the core of the sort of anxiety and grievance and sense that there is a lost opportunity. The federal government has done a lot in this space. They passed changes recently around capital gains tax and negative gearing and obviously investing quite heavily in social housing. You're doing things as a state level. Given the scale of the challenge, is there more you'd like to see Canberra do in terms of helping your state to be able to meet that challenge?
Look, the short answer is yes. And if I said otherwise, I'd be doing the people I care about in respect to housing a great disservice. The thing is, what I would like to see more come out of Canberra, given they've already done a number of important policy reforms, and you mentioned the tax ones, what I want to see come out of Canberra that addresses housing is frankly more money. And whenever a politician, and the reason why I want more money is because we can't afford at a state level to do everything on our own. Now, it's very easy for state premiers to say, we want more money to come out of Canberra because they've got a million calls of their own, and then it becomes a judgment. And I get that. So let me just give you a bit of context so it doesn't just sound like a money argument. The single biggest constraint to more housing growth in South Australia is water, water infrastructure. That is the biggest constraint to growth. We've released land. We've done massive planning reform. We've done massive investments in public housing. We've done massive changes to our tax system to incentivise new builds. And it's all working. We've got the fastest housing growth rate in the country. And lots of that has been in conjunction with work we've done with the feds, particularly with their affordable housing investments and social housing investments. So it's all good stuff. The problem is, in a South Australian context, with one of the fastest growing economies in the country, is, we're trying to just catch up with demand here. And all the work that we're doing is barely keeping pace, which is why Adelaide is one of the few places in the last month that hasn't seen a decline in housing prices. Now, what's the biggest issue is water. Problem with water, I'm giving you long-winded answers here, but the problem with water is water infrastructure is really expensive. We are taking on more debt, and we are charging South Australian water bill payers, SA Water customers, more money. I've jacked up SA Water bills over and above the rate of inflation by 3.5% per annum. And I'm looking people in the eye in the cost of living crisis, working families in the eye, saying I'm jacking up your water bills to fund water infrastructure. That's a really hard thing to do, not just politically, but more hard thing for them to pay. But I'm doing it to try and unlock the housing crisis. If we could get more money into water infrastructure, that would make a big difference. But I understand everyone wants everything from the Commonwealth when it means more money, so these aren't easy problems to solve.
Let's move to another topic, and that's Aukus, which is obviously not just a defence project nationally, it's clearly an industrial project in South Australia. There was Another story overnight about the rate of production of submarines in the United States, unsurprisingly, said that it still remains slow. We've seen these reports now for months and months and months that the story's not changing. Does that not give you concern that this whole project is at risk? And as the Premier of a state that has invested an enormous amount in Aukus for a whole bunch of reasons, is that not concerning, alarming almost?
It absolutely is. And let me be clear about this. It's alarming for a number of reasons. One, it demonstrates that even in countries which have been building nuclear submarines for 60 plus years, they're experiencing challenges with ramping up their capacity to produce. It demonstrates the size of the challenge that is before us. But it also demonstrates that we've got no other choice, because I see people, often very intelligent, considered people, say on Aukus, we should cancel Aukus and buy our submarines from somewhere else that builds them already. Well, no one's selling, right? And the reason why no one's selling is because they can't produce enough for themselves. There is no other country in the world that has a nuclear submarine supply chain that builds them, that is able to build enough for themselves, let alone sell them to anybody else. Which means, for Australia and our people, we have only one of two choices. We either build submarines for ourselves, or we choose that this island continent, in this most unstable of regions globally, doesn't have a submarine platform. We don't have a submarine capability. And I don't know anyone that argues that.
Doesn't that mean that we have to bank in a bit of risk from the United States, not just that they might miss the target, but also that a president, Donald Trump or someone in the future, might say, actually, we can't come through with this? We're pricing that risk in?
Well, there's been no indication at this point that that's going to occur. None.
Except that they're not meeting the targets.
Except that every single government across the three Aukus nations has now had not just change of prime ministers and presidents, but they've had change of governments of different political hues, and every single occasion they've backed it in. All three countries have had reviews into Aukus, notwithstanding the program hasn't been alive that long. They've all reviewed it, and they've all said it makes sense and we're all doing it. Let's accept, though, the point that you've made. Let's say that risk eventuates. What will that demonstrate? Will it only demonstrate yet again that we have to build submarines for ourselves? No one is giving these things to us, no matter how much we pay. If we want a submarine platform as a country, we've got to build it for ourselves. And that's why I'm a supporter of the program. Are there economic benefits to the state? Absolutely. But under, and this will be, for many of your listeners who are outside of South Australia, they will think about the submarine project in the context of when decisions, different iterations of the proposition were being raised back in 2013 when Holden was closing, and they see it as this sort of economic stimulus activity in industrial policy for South Australia. Fast forward to where we are now, South Australia's at full employment. We've got the second fastest growing economy in the country after Western Australia. At other points last year, we were faster. We don't actually need more work. We're doing this project here because the nation needs it, and we've got the skills and the capabilities to be able to deliver it. But let me guarantee something, right? And I've said this publicly before, but it's rarely repeated. This project is going to have problems. It's going to have delays. It's going to have challenges. It's going to have things go wrong with it because it is so mind-bogglingly complex and unprecedented that there will be problems along the way, and there's going to be a million articles written about it. But nothing will change the fact that if we don't build these submarines for ourselves, we don't have a submarine capability. And I don't think that's a risk that the country can afford.
We'll be right back.
Let's move from one contentious topic to another, and that's data centres. You said previously that you want to position South Australia as the destination for the next generation of AI infrastructure. This is clearly one of these issues where there are tremendous potential economic opportunities, but also potential
big
risks for a whole series of reasons, including gaining, I guess, a social license, support from the community about having these data centres in their locations. The Prime Minister has sketched out a broad vision for the types of controls that he'd like to see around those data centers specifically. What about you from a Premier's perspective? If these companies are wanting to invest in South Australia, what are the controls, the specific controls that you want to see particularly? I mean, you spoke about the importance of water here. They're obviously heavy water users. So what would you like to see?
So we announced our data center strategy 5-6 weeks ago, and it turns out it's almost entirely consistent with what the Prime Minister announced last week, I think it was. And again, what we're saying to people who want to invest in data centers in South Australia, which we welcome and we want for reasons I'm happy to go into that are a bit nuanced, but principally because we think we can do it better than most, because the data centers aren't going to be built in suburban Adelaide. They're going to be built, in regional communities. But what we've said is we welcome that investment provided it's done on our terms, the South Australian government's terms. And that means they've got to bring their own generation, principally renewables, because we've got a huge pipeline of renewables in South Australia that are approved, gone through all the environmental and regulatory tests. The only thing they're lacking is a customer, the demand. Data centers can provide that demand. So it unlocks the renewable opportunity, but also on issues such as associated with water. To be honest, I'm less concerned about the water. And the reason is I think the water challenge is being overstated in some quarters, but by virtue of the rapid evolvement of the technology around data centers on closed loop water-cooled data centers, which are very different to the earlier iterations that were being built, only even 2 or 3 years ago. So the bigger issue for me and the principal issue for me is water. Is energy. And as long as we get the energy right, and that won't be a simple problem for these data centers to solve, but if they bring that and they bring their own generation and they comply with our standards, yes, we do welcome them here, and we think they would do a better job of it here than they can in other jurisdictions, principally because of the renewable resource that we've got that is away from high-density urban environments.
Do you share concerns that others have raised that data centres are the major growth factor in the Australian economy, and if this is a boom, we might come up short relatively soon?
I think we should always be cautious about putting all our eggs in a single economic basket. And, I've tested in my own mind and amongst the data centre investors and our own officials in the government, this idea, is there a bubble here? I think no one really knows. What I do know is that if we don't pick and choose, so to speak, which companies choose to invest here, if they invest here and they play by our rules in a way that's consistent with the state and its people's interests and our environment's interests, then they're welcome to spend their money here. I mean, think about this. The focus is on data centers. I've been looking at this from a bit of another sort of viewpoint. Well, I'm worried about AI. I've read a lot about it over the last 6 months. Almost every spare moment I've got, I find myself reading something about it, and my alarm goes up, mainly because I think I am persuaded in the idea that we are witnessing the greatest transformation to the way that people work since the Industrial Revolution. Now, just think about that for a moment. The Industrial Revolution was a long time ago, and that was a huge upheaval that changed a lot for good, but a lot not so good. And that's now happening potentially as we speak before our eyes. And I think that warrants a pretty serious public policy response to embrace the opportunities, which are real, but protect people from the risks and the dangers. And I think that requires some pretty urgent response, and you start to see evidence of a policy response federally, and we've done a bit locally. But to think about this, if you take that as it's given, that this is a change of that size and scale, imagine how reckless it would be for me as Premier of South Australia, for the people that I represent, to turn away investment and the billions of dollars that could be invested in South Australia and let it go somewhere else, and then have my constituents in 10 years' time saying, well, what were you doing to get our piece of the action, right? So this is a complex problem. I don't think it's going to go away. But one thing I'm confident about is it's not going to disappear. It's not going to go away. The money is going to be invested somewhere. And to the extent that that can result in a dividend for our people, we should embrace it, just so long as it actually does provide a dividend rather than an unexpected cost somewhere, whether it be in the environment or in energy prices or elsewhere.
Just on the risks of AI, you're a father of young kids.
Yeah.
You started your career on the shop floor. You've been involved in the trade union movement, thinking about work. Do you worry about what the future of work looks like for your kids and others?
I wouldn't say I'm fretting about it, but I do worry about it. Yeah, I do. Again, let me be candid. My eldest is 11 of our 4 kids. I reckon kids in that age group, this is my theory, just from what I've read, I reckon they're probably going to be okay, mainly because systems will adjust, education systems will adjust, universities will change what they teach. The nature of work will evolve in such a way that by the time she finishes school, we're going to know a lot more about how this plays out than what we do right now. My bigger concern is, honestly speaking, with a 20-year-old who might have chosen to go into university 3 years ago, not knowing what was coming down the line, and is right now at university or at higher education format studying something that lends itself to white-collar work. That might be the sort of job that gets completely disrupted in 3 years from time. That's what I'm a bit worried about at the moment, and that's where I think we've got to be putting a bit of attention to. But for the longer term, I think my assessment is it will probably play out okay. But I think we're going to be very careful about this. And what I do worry about for my 11-year-old is what does the society she starts to participate in as she matures look like? What is the impact of AI on the way our democracy operates? I'm very worried about that. What does AI look like in the way that we interact with each other as human beings? I worry about that, which is a different question from about the way we work.
Well, we're dangerously close to making you late for your next appointment.
It's a bit long-winded, but these are important. But this is a big deal. Like, the public policy challenge on this has only just begun, and I hope as many people are engaged in it as possible, frankly.
Good thing for us to discuss on the pod. Our traditional last question is to ask people what they do when they're outside of work. If you've got a free day, a bit of free time with the family, you probably don't get much, to be honest, Premier.
No, but I don't complain about that because it sort of comes to the you've asked me at a good time, though. I try and take 2 weeks a year off in the July school holidays. It's the only time we sort of take, and we've just had that, and I feel really good for it, actually. But if you ask me what my dream thing to do is, if I'm not at work, watching the kids play sport is, that's started up now, so that's pretty cool. But for me personally, I love nothing more than mucking around in my backyard, getting the lawn right. My Facebook feed is politics, not surprisingly. Politics, sport like footy or whatever, and then lawn.
It's the algorithm at work.
And I know when things are stressful for me because it feeds me more lawn stuff, because I obviously start looking more at, like, if the politics of the day isn't going very well, I don't click on the political articles. I click on how to get my lawn in my backyard in good nick. So that's what I know. I must be more worried than usual.
Well, that's a very satisfying answer. Premier Peter Malinauskas, thanks for coming on the pod. It's been great to talk to you.
No, I appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for joining us from Adelaide. Before we go, we'd like to mention 2 special announcements. The first is that our team of political reporters in Canberra will be recording another Ask Me Anything episode of the podcast when Parliament resumes in August. We want to hear from you, dear listeners, so email your questions to australianpolitics@theguardian.com. We look forward to hearing from you. And next week, we're excited to bring you a conversation with the Governor-General, Sam Mostyn, recorded at Admiralty House on Sydney Harbour. Make sure you subscribe to Australian Politics wherever you get your podcasts. The executive producer of the show is Alison Chan. I'm Tom McIlroy. Have a great weekend.